Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the channel. And today I have a special guest on my channel, Mark Moss from Market Disruptors. Well, if you don't know him or his channel, his videos, I would highly recommend you to do that because to go to his channel and check those, because he has a lot of data, a lot of material about like macroeconomics, like what crypto does within this paradigm and why it is cool, what is important. And the also like deep content is just amazing. So feel free to try it eventually. But first of all, thank you, Mark, for finding time and joining me in this episode. And welcome.
Yeah, thanks so much. It's always great to talk to someone with a different perspective, or kind of same perspective, but from a different part of the world. So already enjoyed lots of the conversation we've had, and happy to be here. Yeah,
like actually, we should start recording like an hour before now, because we had like a lot of topics already discussed, and I guess they would be even more interesting than the questions which we had in our list. Anyway, we'll try to do our best. But first of all, maybe you can tell a couple words about yourself, what you do, how you came to crypto, what you did before crypto, and so on.
Yeah. So so a little bit about me. I've been kind of like just an investor for the last 20 years. I started buying real estate when I was just 18 years old, and started buying real estate and worked my way from different types of asset classes, from single families and developing real estate and multifamily commercial properties, etc. A lot of that. I founded a internet company in 2001 at the bottom of the .com crash, when it was the market was completely obliterated, and I thought it would be a good time to start one at the bottom of a bear market, and did that as well. So I kind of learned a lot about the internet technology, and had a lot of people telling me that will never work, that's stupid, and so I've lived through that before. Managed to sell that off to a Fortune 500 company, got an exit on that, and I've been just involved in the internet technology space and the investing space for the last 20 years. I was also raised in a pretty conservative kind of political home, and so like politics is something that's discussed around the dinner table in my family and extended family, and that's just kind of how I was raised. And when I found Bitcoin, it seemed like all my background pieces kind of came together. So like I had the politics side, I had the money side, I had the business side, I had the technology side, the investing side. And it was really, for me, it was about understanding when I finally understood what Bitcoin was about, and it was about this revolution of resetting the system that we have. This is about 2015. I was like, I'm all in, and I wanted to tell everybody that I know to help usher this whole thing in. And so for the last couple of years, I've just been making content. I write a monthly research report, do videos on YouTube, podcasts, etc. Speak at a lot of different conferences, and just try to get the word out as much as I can. I study, I observe, I read, and I just love it.
Yeah, pretty cool. So like you actually do a lot of job. I follow your channel for a while, and like indeed, I'm not joking when I'm saying like it's enormously deep content, and especially for people not only who like dealing with crypto for certain time and knows pretty much of it, but like in general, even those who are just coming to crypto, they will find it pretty simple, but at the same time, like it will often, people will say, oh, this is blowing my mind. It's something which I should know, but somehow I didn't know. And it's both easy and deep. So I really appreciate this kind of content which you do.
What I've tried to do with it is, I believe, we have this new technology, and a lot of people are like, what is it, and all these things. But for me, I don't think the what it is the most important piece right now, because it's so new. I think in order for someone to switch from one paradigm to the next, we need to know why. So if I'm going to switch from dollars to Bitcoin, why would I do that? Right. Like, I don't care what it is. I want to know why I should care. And so that's kind of where I try to focus my content, is the why. So on my show, we'll talk about like the 2-part series I'm doing right now, which is the end of the dollar, and how the dollar's reserve status is being threatened and what happens next. Or we'll talk about our privacy being taken, and how Bitcoin can bring our privacy back. Or we'll talk about why our money's unstable and why stable coins matter. And so really I tried to focus on the why. There's plenty of people reading the news headlines and you could read the news headlines on your own. So I try to stay away from that and just focus on the why. So I'm glad you like it. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the major questions. Sometimes people just asking like what's happening, but they don't ask why it is happening. So yeah, it's very important. Okay, so we actually already like touched the major point a little bit about crypto and Bitcoin, but maybe you can tell like in a very few sentences why actually do you think that Bitcoin is so cool and why we're like heading to a new era and why it is better than before and why it is important. Why shall we invest? Why shall we actually care about it?
Well, it's really hard to put that into a couple sentences, so I'll give a kind of a I'll give kind of a high level of it, and
You're free.
and you would have to dive into each one of these subjects to understand why they're important. But really, if you want to dig into it, we for 5,000 years we've had a stable money supply of gold, and so when national currency started, we had $35 equal to an ounce of gold. And this many euro, this many Deutschmarks or this much gold, and this many yuan to this much gold, right? And so each one was measured to gold. And in 1971, we lost that, and now there's nothing backing any of the currencies, and they're all just freely floating. And since 1971, and really earlier, that's when it officially happened. But earlier, the governments have just completely distorted and manipulated the money supply, increasing the money supply, inflated the money supply, which steals our value. And I know this sounds a little bit over the top, but I could back it up if we had more time. But I could almost say that every problem that we have in the world today boils down to the money. I know that's a big topic, and everybody, our society has gotten to the point where we want to treat symptoms, but we never want to get to the cure. Right. I listened to a podcast and they talked about rent control and how we need rent control in these cities because rent's gotten too expensive. And does rent control work? Does rent control not work? It was a debate, right? But why are rents so expensive in the first place? Let's get to the root of it, right? We see these never-ending wars that are happening, and should we continue war? Should we go to war? Should we not go to war? But let's get to the root of it. If we didn't have money, if we didn't have a never-ending money supply, wars would go away. Everybody wants to talk about this inequality of the rich and the poor, this growing gap of rich and poor, and what should we do? Should we make it illegal for people to be billionaires? Should we take their money and redistribute? Okay, those are band-aids, but why? Why do we have this growing gap? And it all boils down to the money. Even when you want to look at like all this politically correct speech that's like invading the media these days, it all comes down to the money. If people were focusing on real issues, they wouldn't have time to focus on stupid stuff like this, right? So at the end of the day, I think we could boil all these problems from war and inequality and high prices and inflation and all these things boils down to the money. And it's because we have this money supply that's not fixed to anything. It can be unlimited printed, and it's given to the top, to the elite. Seniorage goes to them, and they, anyway, these are deeper topics, but anyway, Bitcoin gives us another option. And so 10 years ago we didn't have a choice. That was the system we were in, and you could go get a job in politics, but you're never going to change the system. It is what it is. But now with Bitcoin, we have an opportunity to have another way, and it's a peaceful revolution where we just opt out. We opt out with our money. I take my money out of that system that I don't believe in anymore, and I put it in this system over here that I do believe in. Bitcoin is fixed by math. The problem that we have today is the whole world works on trust, and we have to trust that the banks don't steal our money. We have to trust that the government doesn't print $1 trillion and make our money worth less. We have to trust that these institutions don't steal our privacy. We have to trust, right? But we can't. We see time and time again it's been taken. And so with Bitcoin, it's trustless. Now we can trust this open source code that everybody has access to see. We understand that the math is set and it doesn't change. And I believe it can usher in this new economic system that will give us back freedom, prosperity, equality, and all these other things. And I know it's over the top, and so each one of those deserves its own conversation. But that's it in a nutshell.
Yeah, well, actually, you mentioned this is a good point and very like short but succinct explanation. The point is, you just mentioned the trust, and I recall the quote from Andreas Antonopoulos, and he was saying that Bitcoin itself, it's not only the new paradigm, new era in money, but also it's new kind of era in the representation of the relationship between people. Because again, as you said before, there should be a trust in order to make things functioning. But now it is trustless system, and it's absolutely new. There's nothing like that happened before and occurred before. So it's really fundamentally different. So that not only money, but like really like social and like all the aspects which you can think of actually are touched by that.
And shout out to Andreas. If anybody's listening and they're not watching Andreas, they definitely should. But those are those are the topics that we should talk about, right? Everybody's hung up on is Bitcoin as fast as Visa? Like, who cares? like Visa's a payment system. Who cares? We're not trying to get a better PayPal here. Like, PayPal's fine.
How about gold? Is Bitcoin fastest as gold?
Right, exactly. And so you have to understand that. And now our education system has purposely left that out. Nobody knows why gold, how gold was used, etc. So let's stop the conversations of is it faster than Visa, and let's get to the heart of things, right? Like I said, bringing back those big issues.
Right, exactly. Okay, so I guess we just like covered general things, and like everybody believe now that Bitcoin is cool. I would like to just cover the list of the questions which I have from my audience, and people just asked on the channel and Telegram group. They're more specific, and I guess you are one of the perfect person to ask those questions. So let's start with this one. How do you estimate the chances for Bitcoin replacing gold or fiat, or maybe and fiat? And if it will ever happen, what will happen with the global economy in that case, like governments, states, corporations, etc.?
So that's a really big question. Try to unpack that a little bit. How do we gauge the probability that will happen? So we don't make guesses or predictions, but we look at probabilities. First of all, the longer something stays alive, the better the probability that it will continue to stay alive. So that means Bitcoin's now been around 10 years. It started at zero and it's worth a few hundred billion today. And every day it stays alive, the better the chance it will continue to stay alive. So there's that. I would also point to a couple things. Specifically in the United States, we have the financial system of the world is in the United States, and we've seen all the major players from Goldman Sachs, TD Ameritrade, Fidelity, et cetera, all jumping into Bitcoin. Those companies have spent collectively $1 billion plus to get into Bitcoin, and they wouldn't do that for something that was going away. So they're not subject to the whims of the market. They create the market, right? They're the ones that are lobbying the government the hardest to create policies that favor them. So I don't see that going away. So that's kind of where I see that on probability. As far as replacing gold and the dollar or the dollar, those are two separate things. The dollar is a free floating piece of paper that doesn't mean anything. Gold is actually money. So replacing the dollar is easier. Replacing gold may be harder. So let's see how I can say this. The dollar is already on its way out. I have a 2-part video series that goes into depth on this. The second part is coming out. So check those out for depth. But for brevity, the world reserve currency. So right now the dollar is the reserve currency of the world. It's used all over the world. And it hasn't always been that way. It's been that way for about 100 years, and we've seen it change about every 100 years. It was the sterling in Britain before that, and it was France before that, and Portugal, Spain, etc. And so there's lots of signs of the dollar already going on its way out, and the biggest one happened about 2 weeks ago. So the U.S. uses the dollar as a weapon. It uses sanctions against countries, and it kicks people out of the U.S. financial system. And we have kicked so many people out of the financial system that we're like the only ones left in our own financial system. And all the people that have been kicked out decided that we'll just start our own financial system outside of the U.S. And that's been happening over since about 2015, when China, Russia, and Iran started trading oil outside of the U.S. dollar. But the biggest piece just fell. And again, this is incrementally. But in the beginning of the year, we saw the EU start their own money system called Instex, which is basically what the U.S. uses. We use SWIFT. If you've ever done a wire transfer, you've had a SWIFT code. The whole world uses SWIFT, and now Europe started their own version of that. And about 2 weeks ago, it got put into practice. And the reason why this is so massive is our enemies. When I say the U.S.'s enemies, China, Russia, and Iran, they've already been working outside the U.S. dollar. But now this Instex represents our allies, the U.S. allies. And so we're talking about Germany, France, etc., are all now working together with our allies and enemies are all working together in this new financial system, and the U.S. is outside of this. And this happened just a few weeks ago. So that's a massive piece. And so the dollar is on its way out. So and then gold, gold has lost relevance because the education system doesn't teach people history, real history, right? We learn about whatever Christopher Columbus, but we don't understand like the real history of money and government and things like that. And so the young generation doesn't look at gold like the older generation does, because gold used to be money till 1971. So everyone born before that understood that gold is money, and they still view gold as money. But anyone born after that doesn't. And so millennials today and younger generation, they think gold's like, they don't even think about gold. They don't think it's stupid. They just don't think about it, period. And so really over a period of a generation or two, I think, digital money will just replace gold just because of the way that technology moves forward.
Okay, but second part of the question, just a couple of words about that. If it will ever happen, like if Bitcoin will become a new gold or a new type of money instead of fiat, what will happen with, in your opinion, with countries, with governments, with corporations, etc.? How will it look like?
So, I mean, so if that happens, right? So if we get Bitcoin or some other form of new monetary policy or reserve currency, what happens to government? Well, what I believe happens is not good if you're in the government, but it's really good if you're a person living in that country. So what I believe is that we have massive economic prosperity over the world, because what happens is, like we saw this in the 1700s, when the whole world was on a unified monetary system, the world flourished because everyone could trade freely and everyone could specialize in what they did. And so what I believe is that if we can separate money and state, just like we've separated religion and state. We separate money and state. Now the state can't produce the money, and the state goes back to doing what they're supposed to do, which is just basic, if you look at the Constitution, right, it's just basic protection of the country and some organization, but not printing money and not pushing all these policies. So if that happens, what I believe would happen is that we would see the governments of the world lose massive power because they don't influence financial policy anymore, and then we see massive economic freedom and equality return back to the people, because they're not using that money as a weapon against the people. In the short term, it could be painful. In the long term, it would be very, very, very awesome for everybody involved.
Yeah, it's actually will work, as you rightly mentioned, that if nobody will control that new source of money. So Bitcoin nominally is not controlled by anyone, so it's like distributed, it's decentralized, but there are some opinions that like it's actually not that much decentralized. Like miners are pretty centralized, and other things are other parts of Bitcoin ecosystem is kind of centralized. So if, let's say, I would be a huge group of people, wealthy, like not wealthy, but like people with power, maybe part of governments, of banking systems, whatever, like financial elite. And I would say, okay, Bitcoin is the future. We shall have a huge piece of this pie in order to eventually be able to manipulate the financial system. So they will start to accumulate Bitcoin. Maybe they actually do, I don't know. So, and then eventually they will end up to having like most of the Bitcoin have all the leverages to move the system up or down or whatever they want. And then it's not that pretty picture anymore.
Well, I don't think that's really a big fear like you may think it is. So the big problem is the manipulation of the supply. All right, so that's the problem. So when someone can produce more of that scarce asset, and they get access to it, now they have the ability to steal the value. So people can buy up the majority of Bitcoin, but they can't produce more of it. And that's the big thing. They also can't control it in a sense where they can stop, block, prevent it, right? And so this is a big thing with the dollar, or whatever currency system that you're in, is we have 2 billion adults in the world that don't have access to banks. In order to be in the banking system, you have to have permission. Right. I have to go get a bank account, and I have to provide documentation, and they have to give me permission to be in the banking system. Bitcoin's permissionless. So
Right.
that means anyone can just join the financial system, and so we have this massive inequality, not just in the U.S. or Europe or Japan or wherever. We have it in the world, right? We look at countries like Africa and so forth, or South America, and they're extremely poor because they have no access to the financial system because they're not allowed permission. And so anyway, we'll have the permission. But back to your question, the rich people could buy up 50% of the Bitcoin or 70% of Bitcoin, but that doesn't mean they control it. They can't produce more of it, and they can't stop you from using it, and that's the big difference.
Sure.
Could they manipulate the price? Like, could they dump it all on the market to push the price down? I guess they could do that, but they would be shooting themselves in the foot. I mean, they're going to just dump all their money to hurt you. Like, you know what I mean? So that's where kind of game theory comes into play.
Sure. This is another thing which people say about how they can inflate the original supply of Bitcoin, like the same with gold, well, partially make a lot of derivatives and then basically print paper Bitcoin, like 10 paper Bitcoins to one real Bitcoin, and that's why people will hold and have actually not real Bitcoins but derivative Bitcoins, and then in the end of the day you will not know how many people who have actually real Bitcoins, and just only one is the real one, so you'd have to be stick with that and holding your cold wallet, so you'd be more or less safe that way.
And that what you just said is actually probably the biggest threat that I see in reality. That's probably the biggest threat that I see to Bitcoin, that they would use fake policy to control the supply, like they do with gold, right? So they buy and sell fake gold, paper gold, to manipulate the price. That would be my risk. Is the biggest risk is that we would use the financial system to manipulate the price. I did a 4-part series on that because it's such a deep topic. You can go to my channel and search that out. It's 4 parts. It's pretty deep. But basically what we would have to do at that point is we would have to control our keys, right? So Bitcoin is a bearer instrument. I have the right to control my keys. And so if everybody were to withdraw their Bitcoin once a year, for example, people are talking about this, like once a year, January 1st, everyone just pulls their keys, their Bitcoin back to their personal wallet, it would stop that system. Yeah. Right. And if it got so bad, one of the options would be that we could actually fork Bitcoin over to a new chain and take the value, take the value to a new chain, and then all this rehypothecated Bitcoin that's out there is now instantly worthless. And even knowing that that's a possibility or a threat would limit what they would do to that. They don't want to get too overexposed in the remote chance that would happen to them, right? So even the threat of that happening kind of keeps them in check. Yeah, so anyway, it is a legitimate risk, as you say. I agree, it's one of the bigger risks. I think there's options to limit that risk.
Yeah, okay. All right, so actually we just covered only one question from the whole list. We're talking too much, but it's super interesting.
Well, ask easier questions.
Sorry about that. It's not me, like people on the channel. I mean, my audience is really intelligent. I'm so happy about that. Okay, let's go with another one. How will Bitcoin perform, as actually kind of continuation of the previous one, how will Bitcoin perform in the global economical financial crisis, / financial crisis, if it will escalate or the world will dive into a long recession? And to which assets maybe the global capital will flow in that case? Like you can think of Bitcoin, but what other assets capital will go? Like right now the stocks is kind of topping, the real estate is topping, gold and crypto gold. Anything else? Bonds are also like zero rate. How to call it? The return and negative also.
This is a subject I've spent a lot of time on, and again done videos on this as well. I think if we study history, so if we look at like the last financial crash in 2008, 2009, it kind of took the whole world down, and really there wasn't really a safe place for money to go. Gold took a hit just like the stocks and bonds did as well. However, gold rebounded really fast. Even though gold did take an initial hit, it rebounded really, really fast compared to the other assets. So how would Bitcoin do? We don't know. Bitcoin hasn't been around through any financial crash. It was born at the bottom of the last financial crash. All it's seen is a good market. So we don't have any history to tell us. In my guess, I would say that Bitcoin is not ready at this point to become this new gold. I think it's going to take longer before it's there. So I think at this point, Bitcoin is still what we call a risk-on asset. That means that it's speculative, and that means as people are losing their money and their stocks are falling, they'll probably want to sell Bitcoin to get some cash back. I think it might still be a risk-on asset at this point. I think the whole financial system's kind of tied together, and it depends on how bad things get. But we don't have the history to know. We just have guesses, and so I think at this point it's not quite ready for the world's reserve system.
I see. Okay. Well, we'll see. Probably we still have our life to figure this out. Then let's switch to another one. Actually, I have the thing which we can talk about the same question a little bit more, but I'm stopping myself because we will not have ever finish this if I will do. So if Bitcoin will become a new gold standard, let's again imagine this hypothetical situation, and it will constantly grow in price, would it be the problem for the investments with the use of Bitcoin? In other words, why should one invest Bitcoins when it is one of the biggest growing assets?
Yeah, that's a great question. And what's interesting about that is the world, we've been trained and conditioned to spend money. And actually all the policies of the world try to force us to spend our money. They don't want us to hold it. They punish savers. So we don't really know what it's like to have a deflationary asset, an asset that's going up in value. And if anyone's holding Bitcoin right now, you already understand a little bit, like all of a sudden it changes the way you think. Like, do I want to spend this asset that's going up in value? We always want to spend our money because it's worth less in a month than it is today. So we always want to spend our money, but with something like that, we don't. So it changes the dynamic. And so to answer that question, if Bitcoin's going up in value, why would we want to move to another asset class, another investment asset class? Well, we maybe wouldn't, right? So as an investor, as just a general investor, I believe I live on a philosophy that says money goes where it's treated best. So I'm always trying to put my investments into the best category. And if Bitcoin is the best category, then that's where I want my money. That being said, you never put all your eggs into one basket. And so you need to practice asset allocation and diversification. And so even though I believe Bitcoin is the best, well, I don't just believe it. The fact is that Bitcoin has been the best investment in the last 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, all the way to 10 years. But I still wouldn't put 100% of my money into it. So I still have money into real estate. I still have money into different areas. And so to answer that question specifically, money goes where it's treated best. If Bitcoin's going up in value, maybe you don't want to get into other asset classes, but I still believe you should be diversified because we never know what could happen.
That's true. Even though the other assets may depreciate in price comparing to Bitcoin, then it's still kind of the hedging against the sudden drop or something like that. That makes perfect sense. All right. Let's go with another one. There's still plenty of them. So how do you see the situation with, actually, no, let's leave it at the end. Do you think that, since we're talking about the different asset classes, do you think that there is a correlation between the stocks market and crypto?
So again, we don't really have a lot of history to back this up, so it's kind of just a guess at this point. I think from the little bit of evidence that we have, I think I could make a strong case to say that Bitcoin is non-correlated, meaning it's moving opposite of the stock market. So just in the last couple years, it seems like when the stock markets have taken a dump, Bitcoin has jumped. Mm-hmm. So that's actually a video I've been planning to make. I have some of the research done, but I haven't done it yet. But I think there's enough evidence to prove that Bitcoin is moving opposite of the stock market right now, which contradicts a little bit what I just said about where I think Bitcoin is still a risk-on asset, and that's just because we don't have enough real evidence. I think there's enough evidence to show either way.
That's right. In fact, that people try to find those correlations like in the small time frames, but it's always like in this period it is one way and another period is just broken all the correlation, it goes all the way around. So it's really hard to say. And if you look at the longer time scale, it's basically like, okay, we have one cycle for stocks, and how can you make any assumptions, any conclusions on that? So yeah, it's pretty hard. Okay.
I think what you said there is a very, very, very good point to hit, which is the time frames. And
Hmm.
so I get asked all the time, "Where's Bitcoin going to be in the next couple of weeks? Should I buy now, or where do you think Bitcoin will be by the end of the year?" But I don't think in those time frames. I'm old now, right? So like, if I have to wait if I have to wait 10 years, like 10 years is nothing to me. Like I told you, I started saying I'm a big time real estate. I was a really big into real estate investing, and these real estate development deals I would get into are like 5 year deals. Like from the time I find the land, buy the land, do the zoning, get the architects, get the construct. These are like 5 year deals. Like 5 years is nothing for an investment for me.
Mhm.
I invest into like pre-IPO companies, and I'm have to wait 5, 6, 7 years sometimes. So for me, time frames are important, and too many people in Bitcoin are wanting to know what's going to happen this month or this year, and I think that's just the wrong question.
Yeah, absolutely. And the higher the price, the more people who are asking the same question because they are new to the space. They don't know how the things are going and how the system is evolving, and they just want to basically get rich quicker. And this is absolutely wrong a way of thinking when we try to do investing for like in the
I
long
I
term.
I feel much better about saying Bitcoin will be $50,000 in 10 years than I do trying to predict what it's going to be at the end of this year.
I see.
Like
Yeah,
I think I can
so
accurately predict it would be at least $50,000 in 10 years from now, which if that happens, it would be the best investment in the world.
this
People
is
think
a
that,
humble number.
yeah, but even at that, right? Even if people aren't excited by that number, but if imagine if you could buy at 10,000, it goes to 50,000, right, in 10 years. That's an amazing investment. But I think I'd feel comfortable saying that. But what it's at the end of the year, I don't know because we're still at this early. We're still really early. The market's still really small. Like a millionaire jumping into the market can move the market right now.
Yeah,
So it
absolutely. Yeah.
so it needs to grow, it needs to develop, and so I like to look over longer time frames.
Yeah, this is a perfect strategy. I also think that it's you can't predict in these small periods, small time frames, weeks. It's just it can go anywhere, and people always ask like, where I go now, where I go next day or something. It's just impossible to predict. Okay, and now we are thinking also there is kind of the reporting about the I think it's from Mester, he mentioned something about the correlation between the pump of Bitcoin recently and the fact that the Chinese currency, Chinese yuan, uh, depreciated with dollar. So, do you think this situation remains and is actually it exists? And if it will get weaker, then could it affect the price of Bitcoin even more? Like Chinese will switch from yuan to Bitcoin, maybe?
Yeah, I mean maybe we don't know, right? I think if anything, we might see them try to go to some sort of like their own cryptocurrency, like a gold-backed cryptocurrency.
Okay.
I mean, I think we're already starting to see that with Russia. Like Russia's been talking about that.
Ah, I don't know. That's actually a lot of rumors, but like people, often people who don't make decisions, they say something and it doesn't make any power. It doesn't has any power for like legitimate power in government or something, even in the financial sphere, and it's just mostly hype. Well, it's sometimes it's really ridiculous.
Yeah.
All right, so let's see. Let's see. And speaking about China, by the way, which is banning crypto 1,000 times a year and then unbanning it 1,000 times a year again, what are, in your opinion, what are requirements for the complete legalization or an acceptance of cryptocurrencies? Or in which circumstances officials, governments will establish the legal status of crypto in most of the jurisdictions?
Well, I think as in regards to like when will it be fully legal, I think at least in the United States specifically, which I'm more familiar with, I live here. It's not about they don't come out with a book and tell you everything that's legal. They come out
Yeah,
with a book and tell you everything that's not legal,
yeah,
right? So
yeah.
they're not going to come out, and a lot of people, they keep saying we need clear regulations, we need clear regulations, but the SEC is not going to come out and say these are all the things you can do. They come out
Mhm.
and tell you what you can't do. And so
Right.
anyway, so I don't know if there will be that point of where there's clear legalization. But if I was going to answer that, I guess where the point of a real legalization would be if the government started accepting it for taxes.
Oh yeah, that's huge. Then if it will, well, actually it does to some in some states, right? Ohio, I think.
Yeah,
and Wyoming.
there's a couple states that have started doing that. So at the point where the federal government accepts it for
Yeah,
taxes, would be the point where it'd be 100% fully like legal tender.
yeah, that's the point. Like many actually politicians say that why dollar is a solid money, because come on, we are accepting it for taxes. How will you pay taxes with Bitcoin?
Well,
Some
and if you really want to dig in deep to the money system, think about the scam. Okay, so they come up with this idea in the early 1900s. Hey, let's make this money that's like not worth anything. We're just going to print it out of thin air. But
yeah,
how the
that's true.
heck would we? How would we get people to use it? Like, why would anybody use this money that we created out of thin air? Well, what we'll do is we'll put a law in place that all taxes. See, because we didn't start paying taxes till 1913, right? The IRS was formed. So we'll
Mhm.
create a system of taxes where people have to work all year to collect these new pieces of paper that we created, and they have to pay. They have to give them back to us. So they have to work all year to collect them. At the end of the year, have to give them back to us.
That's clever, right?
I mean, when you say it like that, does it sound ridiculous or what, right? So how do we
It's
get
really
people to use these
well,
worthless pieces of paper? Well, let's see. We'll create a new system that they have to collect them and then pay them to us. And so that, and that's ultimately what it comes down to. So
yeah.
it's completely stupid and ridiculous when you actually step back and take a look at it. But I guess yeah, at the point you can pay crypto for your taxes, that's the point where it's fully legal.
Pretty much the same, well, not the same, but kind of the same flavor as the fractional reserve system for banking. Like, yeah, you may think that bank can issue additional money like tenfold of the existing on their balance because people don't actually take at the same time the whole balance sheet of the bank. But in principle, it is printing money from the thin air. It's absolutely like nonsense, particularly if you consider the kind of reasonability of having at least certain level of inflation of money, printing money to the constant level, and then just the commercial bank does this. This is ridiculous, right? But
Yeah.
it happens.
There's a quote that I love from Henry Ford, the father of the automobile, and he said that if the average person understood how the banking system worked, there would be a revolution overnight.
Yeah, yeah, right there.
And I
Yeah,
think
in fact,
I think it's so interesting that people work so hard for money. I mean, people are working 50 hours a week for money, but yet
yeah,
they spend zero time thinking about where that money goes or what it does.
because they
All
don't
the
have time.
time is spent on making it, and they think no time about what's happening with it, why it's losing value, etc. And it's kind of ridiculous if you think about it.
That's the whole beauty, kind of quote unquote beauty of the system. Like people are so busy trying to earn money, they don't have time to think about the money itself. And the more like wealthier you become, the more time you have, free time, you start to think about what actually I'm doing in life. What are the different like perspective? What is the different facets of my life, and what I'm doing here, and okay, what about money, and all the stuff. So eventually you start to question yourself, and well, why didn't you actually ask the same questions before 10 years ago? And then you realize that you were just stupid. And okay,
Yeah.
that's a thing. All right, I think that we have like already like 40 minutes, and I will have a lot of fun putting the translation of all this video. Probably I will do my bad job on that. Anyway, I think we shall wrap up, and maybe we'll have some like elevator pitch on the Bitcoin and why people should care or something, or let's say why we need to consider investing in maybe some shitcoin instead of Bitcoin, like whatever you think is important to say in the end.
Well, I think I mean we've covered a lot of important stuff. I started
What's your
out
biggest,
kind of
sorry, what's
I
your
started out
biggest
with
take on altcoins?
I started my biggest take on altcoins. I would
Stake, not
say
stake. What's your biggest stake? Do you have any altcoins, or are you just Bitcoin maximalist?
um, I'm kind of a Bitcoin maximalist, and what I
Oh,
mean by that, and what I mean by that is I believe the money coin has been won, like the race for money
oh,
has been won. Like Bitcoin's the race for money, right? I
yeah.
think there's still use cases for like privacy coins today.
Mhm.
Eventually, I see that being put onto Bitcoin, and Bitcoin will take over that as well. But I think there's still use cases for privacy coins today.
Okay, guys,
Um,
you heard. Just buy Monero and Zcash right now. It was
I,
an
I
investment.
I like
That's
I like Zcash. I like Zcash. I like the fact that they're changing their inflation policy and their reward systems that they're having. I think that's going to really help the ecosystem a lot.
yeah.
And I think they have a really good technology, and I really like their team. So Zcash is one that I do like. Monero also is good. So I think there's still some use cases. I think eventually that gets put onto Bitcoin. You know, they're already talking about Schnorr and Taproot, et cetera. But there's that. So anyway, I think the race for money is one. So like, I'm not interested in like Litecoin or XRP or you know, any of those other payment coins. I like Ethereum. I think there's use cases for Ethereum. I'm really interested in the DeFi space, the decentralized finance space, and that's growing really, really rapidly on the Ethereum ecosystem. So I like that. And I think there's other interesting applications that are a little bit smaller, but not as many as I used to. I think there's still, if you're an investor, I mean, if you're a trader, then you're just trading assets and you don't care about any of the underlying assets. But if you're an investor, I think there is a way to structure your portfolio where your asset allocation for crypto, a majority of that maybe is in the majors like Bitcoin and maybe Bitcoin and Ethereum. But maybe there's a small piece of that portfolio that's used for your venture portfolio, your venture fund, and you're taking moonshots. And so maybe I'm taking a small piece of that and putting it into some of these small altcoins. So I'm taking, let's say, 10% of my crypto allocation and putting it into these moonshot coins, these small cap coins, and seeing if and doing it for an investment. So you have to understand, why are you buying it, right? So I'm buying Bitcoin because I'm on for the ideology. I'm on for the revolution, right? I believe it's going to change the world. Why would I buy Tyrion? Well, I think I can make 100x on it. Well, that's fine. I'll buy it. I'll write it up. When it triples, I'll sell it. I'm not buying it. I'm buying it more as a trader, right? I'm not buying it as an investor.
Yeah.
And so I think you have to be able to look at things differently. I'm okay buying assets I don't believe in because I believe I can make money on them short term. The reason why I buy Bitcoin is completely different, if that makes sense.
It's like there is saying, like most of the altcoin, well, let's say if there is such a thing like altcoin maximalist, then most of the altcoin maximalists are actually trying to gain more Bitcoin through the gains from altcoins.
Exactly. That's the game.
Okay, so sorry, I interrupted you. So, but anyway, what's your final word for our episode?
So my final word would just be, I think we talked about timeframes, and I think that's a super important point. And I just recommend that everybody just stays patient. When you're investing into a new technology, you have to understand that it takes time, and there's a process that all technology evolves on. I talked about myself starting in the bottom of the bear market in the .com space in 2001, which was 11 years after the internet kind of went public. And it was people told me it was stupid, it would never work, it was too slow, etc. And that was 11 years later. We're really like 3 or 4 years later into this Bitcoin blockchain space. Now, Bitcoin's been around 10 years, but really this whole crypto space is about 3 years old. And so I think everyone's expecting way too much, way too soon. I think we need to adjust our timeframes and know that all the issues as far as speed, scalability, all those things will be solved. We're early stage, and so I think if people can be patient and look over a long time period, they'll be better off. They'll be more successful. And then on top of that, I would encourage everybody to dive into the rabbit hole. If any of these topics like interested you, like, wow, I didn't know that about banking or reserve banking, or I didn't know that about fractional reserve, or I didn't know that about whatever, like, do some research on your own. Like, invest into yourself, invest in your own education. So I'd definitely recommend everybody just dive into your own rabbit hole.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I would like to add a couple of words about the timeframes, which you mentioned, that we like things will happen maybe bigger and longer time scale. I would quote Anthony Pompliano, who is quoting, I think, Bill Gates, saying that we are overestimating the results which will happen within 2 years or like 1 year, but we're greatly underestimating what will happen within 10 years. So this is probably the suiting here fairly well. So we don't know exactly what will happen within 10 years, because from 10 years from now, well, 10 years ago, Bitcoin was nothing, and now it is like,
think about how many people have said they wish they bought Bitcoin 10 years ago.
Yeah.
But nobody thinks about holding Bitcoin for 10 years.
Sure. Well, there are probably some of them. There are some of them. They still hold.
I know.
You may be familiar with this HODL waves from what it was, Adaptive Capital. who made this. No, maybe not adaptive capital. The distribution of the holding the UTXOs for a certain time.
Yeah.
You know.
Mhm.
So yeah, like 5 years already, maybe 7 years. So people actually literally hold it for years, for 5+ years. That's amazing. So actually, they knew they knew. So yeah,
Yeah, but most of the questions that you field and I field are people that are not thinking 10 years out. They wish they bought it 10 years ago, but they're not thinking about holding it for 10 years. And that's kind of what I mean.
it's still like when you're thinking about buying it. Let's say now you think maybe it's already kind of saturating, and maybe I'm buying the peak right now. When you're like looking at the history and all those spikes and cycles, and you think maybe I'm already too late. Maybe it's not. Maybe I'm just like buying now, and it will go to recession and going down, and I will not get my money back within like 10 or 20 years. So it's always a trade-off, and we have to take risks. So it's kind of game theory, as you said.
Yeah. Cool.
Okay, well, thank you so much for doing that. We have a long episode, so I'm really happy that we made it, and I think people will have fun and learn a lot from your answers. So once again, if you want to know more, go to Market Disruptors website, YouTube channel, Twitter. I will leave the links in the description down below. And if it will be possible, then I will be happy to see Mark again on my channel. Thanks again.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm stopping recording. Goodbye, guys. See you probably tomorrow.